Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Mendez, and I am here to do the Refutation on the physician-assisted suicide speech. For those of you who don't know, physician-assisted suicide is a form of suicide with the aid of a doctor who knowingly assists someone with the knowledge or means, or both, required to commit suicide. It is usually done with terminally ill patients. My opponent, Ben's claim, was that legalizing physician-assisted suicide in the United States will have a positive effect on the medical system. He states that physician-assisted suicides will cause hospitals to be more effective and that legalization of PAS is beneficial to both patients and their families. I am here to prove that legalization of PAS in the United States will not cause hospitals to be more effective, and that will be beneficial to neither patients nor their families. My advocate's first claim is that PASs will cause hospitals to be more effective. He adds that out of 70 terminally ill patients, 73% believe physician-assisted suicide should be legalized, and 40 of them would have considered PAS in the near future. While the statistic seems promising, it fails to acknowledge the large amount of terminally ill patients nationwide. The survey only takes 70 terminally ill patients' viewpoints, which is only a fraction of the total amount nationwide, which accounts for a sweeping generalization. The statistic is also ambiguous, as it does not say how many would for sure go through with physician-assisted suicide. The key word here is the word considered. According to the Journal of American Medical Association, about 1 out of 10 terminally ill patients said they've seriously considered using physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia to end their own lives. Interestingly, half of those people initially said they would have considered it, but when interviewed again, they ended up changing their mind, which adds to the numbers given by the first statistic done on 70 terminally ill patients. To understand this better, think of if a law was passed to finally legalize the use of marijuana for recreation purpose. Well, you have the option to now use it legally. The truth is that some people, regardless if they voted for it or against it, will still not take advantage of using it for their various reasons. Just because a law is passed doesn't make people automatically choose to take advantage of it. My advocate also mentions that costly medical drugs can be saved. While this is true, due to the very few amount of terminally ill choosing the PAS route, the amount of resources saved would be insignificant, thus not doing much to improve hospitals' effectiveness. The same principle applies when my advocate adds that doctors and nurses will have more time focusing on more savable patients. Adding to the effect PAS has on hospitals, studies show that there is a psychological toll doctors who perform PASs carry. According to an article written by Dr. Kenneth R. Stevens, a medical doctor with over 37 years experience, doctors describe being profoundly adversely affected, being shocked by the suddenness of death, being caught up in the patient's drive for assisted suicide, having a sense of powerlessness, and feeling isolated. A report from the Netherlands states that many physicians who had practiced euthanasia method mentioned that they would be most reluctant to do so again. This psychological toll is relevant to the argument since it plays a major role in a hospital's effectiveness. If doctors begin to suffer from psychological tolls of physician-assisted suicides, then the hospital's overall effectiveness goes down. My advocate's second claim is that the legalization of PAS is beneficial to both the patients and their families. He goes on to include a story of Brittany Maynard, a terminally ill stage 4 brain cancer patient. Brittany chose to move to Oregon in order to take advantage of the legal physician-assisted suicide there. While the decision to end her life might have seemed beneficial to her, does the same really apply to her family members? My aunt, Magdalena Orozco, was diagnosed with intestinal cancer 2 years ago. At the time she was first diagnosed, she was only given a year to live. The doctors even mentioned to her that getting treatment was not recommended as it would not help cure since the cancer had already spread too far. Despite the doctor's recommendations, she still chose to do the treatment, and now 2 years later she is finally cancer-free. While she could have chosen the easy way out, she chose to fight for her life, which is what I think a lot of people would do. Today I'm glad to know that my aunt didn't give up, and that if one day she passes, then we remember her as a fighter. My advocate also mentions that patients' families can have an additional option when which can potentially be financially beneficial. The main problem with this is its support, which states that health insurances generally do not cover for cancer treatment. I looked up an article on chemotherapy costs on nerdwallet.com, which was one of the sources that he used to find prices of cancer treatment drugs, and it says right in the article, quote unquote, that most health insurance policies should cover at least part of the cost of chemotherapy, according to cancer.org. Interestingly enough, it refers back to the same facts page I found on cancer.org that talks about how the new Affordable Care Act helps cancer patients pay for their treatment. The information my opponent obtained on how health insurance generally does not cover for cancer treatments was from a 2010 medical blog post done by Martin Johnson, professor at CSU East Bay. This was before the Affordable Care Act was implemented and could explain the reasoning behind such a statement. Overall, the legalization of physician-assisted suicide in the United States would not lead to any more positive effects on the medical system. The very few people who would actually use it would not significantly increase the effectiveness of hospitals, and also the negative psychological effects associated with doctors who perform such procedures would not help. However, it is important to note that this argument has little influence on the argument of whether or not people should have the right to physician-assisted suicide in the United States. That in its own is another controversy. I hope I convinced you to accept my claims, and thank you for listening.
All right, Robert, you identified the topic. You've got the secondary claims labeled. You've got clear counterclaims that you're going to present on each point. I think that that's effective. That first statistic on how hospitals measure the effectiveness and what doctors feel about that, that was a little bit confusing. And I thought that you pointed out that there was something wrong with the advocate's use of that evidence, that it seems like it's a sweeping generalization and that it's a little bit unclear exactly what the evidence says. I thought that that was a reasonable challenge on that. The idea that there isn't any follow-through, I thought that that was a pretty solid point on your behalf, suggesting that just because the advocate had information that said a lot of people would consider this doesn't mean that a lot of people would use it. And that's, by the way, the basis of this cost argument later on, because the idea is, well, if we've got 90% of the cancer patients who are using up all these resources, if they choose to use physician-assisted suicide, then maybe there would be some efficiency or financial savings or that kind of thing. But like you said, it's less than 1/10 that consider it, and only half of that 1/10 actually, feel like they would go through with it after reconsidering it. So it's a pretty small percentage. The idea that that's going to have a huge impact, that's the way I think you need to put that information together. I think that's kind of what you were saying, but it's just like, when you were a kid and you did math, you need to show your work. You need to show how those things are going together. Because your conclusion is there, but how did you get to that conclusion? You need to explain it to people a little bit more. I thought that the idea that there is also a negative impact on the physicians was a good counterclaim. It doesn't apply directly to the issues that the advocate talked about, except on the nature of the hospitals themselves and their efficiency, and the idea that doctors have a problem with this, that they react poorly to it. I thought that was pretty effective. On that second point, your example, you've got a personal example on this, and I'm glad that your aunt is still around. That's a good piece of news. It would be nice if we had something other than the personal example to go with it, some other illustrations of that, so you could back that up, because I don't doubt you. I'm sure you're telling the truth, but it's not verifiable in any way, shape, or form. If we were having a debate, somebody could easily come up with a story of their own, a hypothetical, for instance, or they might even portray it like they were on a helicopter getting RPG fire on them. They just elaborate and exaggerate, what's going on. So, like I said, some other information there would be good. I'm not saying don't use that, just that's all you've got on that point. And there are people who take that exact position that you're talking about, people who've lasted a lot longer than any doctor predicted, people who have actually recovered, that sort of thing. So I like the idea that you've got on that. All right, thank you very much.